Absolutely.
All right.
All right. So,
Okay, this is a good question for you. Could yesterday's terrorist attack in Belgium have been prevented?
great question. I think in the current context, probably not. But I think in the future, we want to get to a point where we could answer that question, yes. And let me explain that a little bit. So I think right now, I think the intelligence and law enforcement agencies in Europe, they have not gone through what we went through after 9/11. After 9/11, we figured out how to take all of these disparate pieces of information and put the puzzle pieces together to try to disrupt plots, prevent things before they happened. But it took huge amounts of breaking down stovepipes and figuring out how to share intelligence information, not only within the intelligence community, but with law enforcement at different levels, federal down to state, down to local. And so it was a very, difficult multi-year process. I think Europe is only beginning that process. And even though you have the European Union and this incredible single market, free movement of people and goods and services, the truth is when it comes to intelligence and counterterrorism, that information sharing doesn't happen very much and doesn't happen very well. And so I think they were missing too many pieces of the puzzle for them to have been able to prevent it. But I think over time, we'd like to get to a point where some reforms have occurred, they figure that out, and we're able to foil more plots, if they arise in the future.
Well, I just want to add to that. There were reports, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, who is not my cup of tea, but he claims that Turkey released one of the bombers to Belgium about a year ago, released him from prison, but Belgium could not or would not detain him for lack of evidence. I used to live in Brussels. I lived there a number of years, and I used to jog through the neighborhood of Molenbeek, which has become notorious. I lived there 16 years ago, and if you jog through Molenbeek 16 years ago and just looked around, it looked like one of the more worrying neighborhoods of Cairo. And all of the identifying, this kind of trademark, beards worn in a certain way on men, it was all present. It was all quite obvious. When the Paris attacks happened, and it turned out that the plan had been largely hatched in Molenbeek, it was the biggest non-surprise to anyone who lived in Belgium or in Europe imaginable. I think you're right in the sense that Europe Europe did have 7/7, the London bombings. It did have the Madrid bombings. But, take something like intelligence sharing. Europe has been very reluctant to share passenger data with the United States. Some of this comes out of Snowden, but it's a long-standing thing. And I understand if there are Europeans who, were spied on by the Stasi. I get that fear. But there's a risk that you fetishize civil liberties so much that you allow the Molenbeeks to take root. One difference between the United States and Europe is that in the United States, the ISIS terror we've had, or most of the terror we've had, guys like Nidal, Major Hassan, these were lone wolves. In Europe, you have cells. And cells can only happen when there are enclaves. How is it that that fellow, the mastermind of the Paris attacks, how was he able to live in Molenbeek for 5 months? Dozens of people must have known that he was there. So I think that Europe has to kind of get a grip on the scale of the problem and some more seriousness about doing things within the law to stop it, because the alternative is what you have in France, which is a state of emergency now, and it's entering its 6th month. Anyway.
But I think there's also the larger question of you have these immigrant communities that really have never been integrated into the society. And there really isn't an adequate set of efforts to do that. I think it's a very different experience for immigrants coming to this country versus immigrants ending up in Belgium or France and so forth, in terms of the degree to which people feel eventually, over time, may take a generation or two, but over time, really assimilated, and I'm now an American. You don't hear many immigrants from the Middle East in Europe or North Africa in Europe saying, I feel like I've been accepted as a Frenchman or a Belgian or what have you.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, you move to New York, and if someone in your third week of living in New York says, where are you from? You'll say, I don't know, East 73rd Street or whatever. But you can live in Belgium for 40 years, and if you're not, in fact, Belgian, you will never say, oh, I'm from Belgium. You are German, you're Spanish, or you're Tunisian or something else. I think that's very different and one huge strength we have.
Okay. Next question. Whoops.
This is an interesting format.
Yes, it is. Oh, this is good. What is something you've changed your mind about in the last decade, and what caused that shift?